20 tons of American iron sitting on tracks that moved like a living thing. The Lombard steam log hauler didn't roll on wheels. It crawled, steel cleats biting into snow so deep a horse would disappear, dragging timber loads that weighed more than locomotives through winters cold enough to freeze the breath in your lungs. This was 1901. No bulldozers, no diesel power, no hydraulics. Just a vertical boiler screaming steam into white skies, a blade that could snap century-old pines, and crews of men who understood that warmth was negotiable, but the quota wasn't. Picture standing in northern Maine, January 1905, dawn not yet breaking. Temperature hasn't touched zero in 3 weeks. The snow reaches your chest. You're a logging foreman staring at 10,000 board feet of spruce and pine that needs to reach the mill before spring thaw turns everything to impassable mud. Your horse teams are dying. 3 animals shot yesterday alone, legs shattered on ice, unable to pull loads they were never built for. The men are getting hurt. Hypothermia takes 1 man every few weeks. The logs aren't moving fast enough, and the company wants results or they'll find someone who can deliver them. That's when the Lombard arrives. 30 feet of mechanical fury that shouldn't work but does. The thing weighs 18,000 pounds empty before you load the coal and water. The front ride's on massive wooden skis because Alvin Lombard figured out you don't fight snow, you glide over it. The back end is where physics gets aggressive. 2 wooden tracks wrapped in steel cleats, each track 8 feet long, crawling forward like iron centipedes. The whole contraption is powered by a vertical boiler that burns half a cord of wood every hour, just maintaining steam pressure. Black smoke pours from the stack. The ground shakes when it moves, and behind this mechanical beast you chain together sleds loaded with logs, 10 tons per sled, 20 sleds in sequence. 300 tons total. Then you open the throttle and pull. Here's what made the Lombard revolutionary. And it wasn't elegance. This was brute force engineering married to genuine innovation. The machine distributed weight across 16 square feet of contact area. Where a wheeled vehicle concentrated tons onto 4 points and sank, the Lombard floated on top of snow like a man on snowshoes. The steel cleats didn't just grip, they bit into ice with enough force that slipping became physically impossible. The tracks themselves were replaceable because Lombard understood they'd wear out. Everything was designed for field repair by men with hammers and wrenches, not specialists with proprietary tools. The engineering was primitive by modern standards, but revolutionary for 1901. Lombard didn't have computer modeling or stress analysis software. He had a drafting table, a pencil, and 30 years building steam engines in Maine machine shops. He understood that wood flexes where steel snaps. He understood that steam pressure was the heartbeat and everything else was plumbing. The boiler was a work of functional art, vertical design with a firebox at the base and steam dome at the top. Water level had to be monitored constantly through a sight glass. Too low and the boiler cracked from thermal stress. Too high and water got into the cylinders which could blow the heads clean off. The pressure gauge was your life, and when it climbed toward the red line, that screaming relief valve gave you 30 seconds to crack it open or shut down the fire before catastrophic failure. Let's talk about how this monster actually worked, because the mechanics reveal everything about the men who operated it. You start with fire. Shovel coal into the firebox like feeding a dragon that's never satisfied. The fire heats water in the vertical boiler. Water turns to steam. Steam builds pressure. 200 psi, enough to rupture steel if the rivets don't hold. That pressurized steam forces its way into horizontal cylinders mounted low on the frame. Inside each cylinder, a piston. Steam pushes the piston forward with explosive force. The piston connects to a crankshaft. Crankshaft turns a drive shaft. Drive shaft rotates the rear tracks. Tracks grip snow. machine moves forward, simple, brutal, effective. But here's the genius Lombard brought to an impossible problem. Those tracks didn't just move the machine, they transformed how America thought about transportation in winter. Before the Lombard, winter logging meant waiting for enough snow to create ice roads, waiting for temperatures cold enough to freeze those roads solid, waiting for conditions that might last 6 weeks or might last 6 days depending on weather nobody could predict. The Lombard operated when nothing else could. Blizzard conditions that stopped horse teams meant nothing to a machine that weighed enough to plow through drifts and generated enough heat that snow melted off the boiler before it could accumulate. The front skis steered by pivoting left or right, carving through snow drifts like a ship through waves, no differential, no complex gearing. You cranked the wheel and hoped the skis bit before you plowed into timber. The whole machine ran at one speed forward, no reverse. Get stuck and you unhitch the sleds, back the hauler up manually using pry bars and profanity, then tried again. If boiler pressure dropped, you stopped. If tracks broke, you stopped. If the fireman collapsed from smoke inhalation, you stopped. Everything else you kept moving. Where did this thing operate? Not forests, frozen oceans of timber. Northern Maine, where white pine 200 years old reached toward skies that stayed dark 18 hours a day in winter. Northern Michigan, Quebec wilderness, deep Minnesota woods, New Hampshire, backcountry. The logging camp sat 30 miles from the nearest town, 40 miles from railroads, 50 miles from anything resembling help. Men lived in bunkhouses heated by a single wood stove, woke at 4 in the morning when darkness was absolute, worked until sunset, ate beans and salt pork, drank coffee strong enough to strip varnish, slept in their clothes because undressing meant freezing. The ice roads themselves were engineering marvels built by hand in conditions that would hospitalize modern workers, pack down snow with horse-drawn rollers, flood it with water from tank sleds, let it freeze into glass. The water came from holes chopped through lake ice by men swinging axes in temperatures that froze sweat on their backs. If the road was smooth, the Lombard could pull 300 tons. If rough, the sled shattered and everything stopped. The entire operation depended on cold holding. Temperature rose above freezing and the roads melted. Sleds bogged. The Lombard couldn't pull. Logs that couldn't be hauled stayed in the forest to rot. Thousands of dollars abandoned because ice melted 2 weeks early. Now the danger, because this machine was a death trap on tracks. The boiler was the first problem. 200 psi of superheated steam contained in riveted steel. When a seam split, the boiler didn't leak, it detonated. The explosion sent shrapnel in every direction, vaporized anyone nearby. The force could throw a 10-ton boiler 300 feet, level a building, kill everyone within a 100-yard radius. Every logging camp had protocols. Hear that relief valve screaming? Run, don't look back, don't try to fix it, don't try to save the machine. Get clear and pray you're far enough when it goes. There are records. In 1907, a Lombard in northern Michigan blew its boiler on a frozen lake. The operator saw the pressure gauge climbing, tried dumping steam. Too late. The boiler ruptured like a bomb. Operator killed instantly. Fireman thrown 50 feet, back broken. He lived, but never walked again. The machine scattered across 2 acres of ice in pieces. The company replaced it within a month. Had to. The logs needed moving. The tracks were the second killer. Open, exposed, moving with 18,000 pounds of force behind them. Slip between track and frame and you got crushed. The tracks moved slow, maybe 2 miles per hour, but they moved with mechanical certainty. They didn't stop. They didn't hesitate. Bone crumbled like chalk. Men lost feet. Lost legs. bled out in snow, waiting for help that wouldn't arrive for hours because the nearest doctor was a day's travel away. Fall off the machine while it's moving and the sleds behind you run you over. 300 tons doesn't stop for a man. The operator would hear the scream, slam the throttle shut, crack the steam release, pray he could stop before the entire load crushed the body. Sometimes he could. Sometimes he couldn't. The machine kept a schedule and the schedule didn't care. The firebox demanded constant feeding. Fire goes out, steam pressure drops. Pressure drops, engine stalls. Stall in the middle of a frozen lake and you're stuck. Getting unstuck meant manually shoveling coal, manually relighting fire, manually building pressure again while the temperature sat at 20 below and wind tried to kill you. The fireman stood on a platform at the boiler's back, exposed to elements, shoveling coal for 12-hour shifts. His hands blistered, his back screamed, his lungs filled with coal dust and smoke. He couldn't stop because if he stopped, the machine died. And if the machine died in the wrong place, everyone died. Steering was the fourth hazard. The front skis were controlled by a wheel with no power assist. You fought friction of two giant wooden skis carving through packed snow. Each ski was 10 feet long, 18 inches wide, shod with steel runners. Turning the wheel meant physically pivoting those skis against tons of resistance. Hit a drift wrong and the skis snapped. Oak skis 2 inches thick, snapping like kindling when they hit buried stumps or frozen rock. Lose the skis and you lost all steering. A 30-foot steam engine with no steering was a missile. The operator dumped steam and prayed momentum stopped before careening into trees or off cliffs. Lucky ones came to rest in snowbanks. Unlucky ones, they found the wreckage in spring. Then the cold. Frostbite was assumed. You wrapped hands in wool and hoped, covered your face with scarves and breathed through fabric because breathing straight air at 20 below could freeze your lungs. Operators wore leather coats lined with wool, thick canvas pants, boots lined with felt. Wasn't enough. Men lost fingers, lost toes, lost noses and ears. The tissue froze, turned black, fell off. They kept working because if they didn't, logs didn't move. And if logs didn't move, the mill didn't run. No mill meant no paycheck. There was no workers' compensation, no disability insurance, no OSHA, get hurt, get fired. Die, they buried you when ground thawed. Your name went into a ledger, your belongings sold to pay for burial. Next day someone else took your place. But it worked. Against all odds, against all reason, the Lombard log hauler worked. It pulled loads no horse team could touch. Operated in conditions that would strand modern trucks. Ran 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, all winter. And it made Alvin Lombard wealthy. By 1905, dozens of Lombards operated across New England and the northern Midwest. Logging companies bought them because they paid for themselves in one season. A single Lombard replaced 50 horses, moved 3 times as much timber in half the time, didn't get tired, didn't get sick, didn't need rest. Just needed coal and water and a man crazy enough to run it. Those men were legends. The operators were part engineer, part daredevil, part lunatic. They understood steam pressure and track tension and ice roads, could nurse a dying boiler back to life, could steer a runaway hauler through forest at night with nothing but moonlight and instinct, could work 16-hour shifts in blizzards and show up next morning. They were paid double what loggers made, sometimes triple, earned every penny, because when something went wrong, and something always went wrong, the operator fixed it. The fireman kept coal flowing, but the operator kept the machine alive. Track throws a cleat. Operator stops, grabs a sledgehammer, pounds it back into place. The cleats were bolted through wooden track with half-inch bolts. Bolt shears, you drill a new hole, tap in a new bolt, keep moving. Boiler pressure spikes. Operator cracks the relief valve and rides out the scream of escaping steam. Superheated steam at 200 psi strips skin off your hand in a second. Operators learn to crack valves with wrenches on 6-foot poles. Steering locks up. Operator muscles the wheel until shoulders burn and hands bleed. No mechanics. No backup crew. No radio for help. You fixed it yourself or you didn't fix it. There were stories. Every camp had them. Big Jack Morrison ran a Lombard in Quebec woods for 8 straight winters without missing a day, survived 2 boiler explosions, lost 3 fingers to frostbite. Once steered his hauler across a frozen river when ice started cracking beneath him. Didn't panic. Opened throttle wide and raced the ice. Made it across with seconds to spare. Ice collapsed behind him. 20 sleds full of logs went straight through. They pulled the logs out in spring. Henry Bjornson, a Norwegian, could hear things in the steam engine other men couldn't. He'd stop the hauler, tilt his head like a dog hearing a whistle, and say the drive chain was about to snap. It would. Every single time. Men said he had a 6th sense. Truth was simpler. He paid attention. He listened. He knew that machine better than he knew his own wife. When the chain finally snapped for good in 1909, it whipped around and took his left arm at the elbow. He wrapped it in a tourniquet, finished the haul one-handed, walked himself to the camp doctor. Back on the machine 3 months later. One-armed, still the best operator in the company. Thomas Carney ran a Lombard in northern Minnesota during the winter of 1912, coldest winter on record, 60 below with wind chill. Other operators refused to work. Said it was suicide. Carney didn't care. Fired up the boiler, loaded the sleds, pulled. For 6 weeks straight he worked alone. The firemen quit after the first week. Carney did both jobs, shoveled coal and steered simultaneously. His company moved more timber that winter than any other camp in the state. When spring came, Carney collected his pay and disappeared. Nobody saw him again. Some said Alaska. Others said he died in a bar fight in Duluth. Either way, he became legend. The man who beat the coldest winter in history with nothing but a steam engine and stubbornness. The Lombard wasn't just a machine. It was proof that tracked vehicles could work, that they could carry massive loads over terrain wheeled vehicles couldn't touch. When World War I broke out, military engineers remembered the Lombard, remembered the tracks, remembered that this American logger had solved a problem armies desperately needed solved: how to move heavy equipment across mud, snow, broken ground. They built tanks. The British Mark I tank, first tank ever used in combat, used a tracked drive system inspired directly by machines like the Lombard, the French Renault FT, the American M1917, the German A7V, every crawler tractor that came after. Every single one owed a debt to Alvin Lombard and his steam monster. The Holt Tractor Company, which later became Caterpillar, studied the Lombard design, saw the tracks, saw the possibilities, built an empire on the same principle. Distribute the weight, increase contact area, you can go anywhere. But Lombard didn't build his machine for war, didn't build it for glory, built it to move logs, to solve a problem killing men and horses, to make logging possible in places where it wasn't. And he succeeded beyond imagination. By 1910, Lombard haulers operated in 11 states and 3 Canadian provinces: Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, New Hampshire, Vermont, Montana, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, Alaska. Working in temperatures from 40 below to 20 above. Pulling loads on ice roads, packed snow, frozen lakes, mountain passes. Lombard himself became wealthy. Not oil baron wealthy, but comfortable. Owned the Lombard Traction Engine Company in Waterville, Maine. Employed machinists, foundry workers, blacksmiths, built engines to order, custom jobs for specific terrain, Wider tracks for deep snow, narrower tracks for mountain passes, bigger boilers for heavier loads, smaller boilers for tight forests. He understood every logging operation was different, and he adapted. That's what made him successful. Didn't build one design and force it on everyone. Listen to operators, learn from failures, improve the design season after season. By 1915, the Lombard hauler had gone through 12 major revisions. Tracks got stronger, boilers got more efficient, steering got smoother. But the core principle never changed. Steam tracks forward momentum. That was the formula. It worked for 2 decades. By the 1920s, internal combustion engines started replacing steam. Gasoline-powered tractors were lighter, faster, easier to operate. Didn't need a fireman, didn't need coal, didn't need water. You filled the tank with gasoline, turned the key, went. The Lombard haulers were phased out, scrapped, melted down for steel. Companies that owned them sold them for parts or abandoned them in woods when they broke down for the last time. A few survived. One sits in the Maine State Museum in Augusta, another in a logging museum in Michigan, one in Minnesota, one in New Hampshire, maybe a dozen total out of hundreds built. They're rusted now, silent, boilers cold, tracks frozen in place, fireboxes filled with bird nests and dead leaves. But if you stand next to one, you can still feel it, the weight, the presence, the raw mechanical violence of a machine built to do the impossible. You can see scars on the boiler where repairs were made, see wear marks on tracks where steel chewed through wood season after season, see the operator's platform, barely big enough for a man to stand, exposed to wind and snow and cold. And you can imagine what it took, what it cost, what it meant. Let's talk about what we lost, because something was lost when we stopped building machines like this. We gained safety. We gained efficiency. We gained comfort. Those are good things. Nobody should die because a boiler exploded. Nobody should lose a hand because a track threw a cleat. Nobody should freeze to death on an operator platform. But we also lost something. We lost simplicity. The Lombard could be repaired with a hammer and wrench. The entire machine could be disassembled with basic hand tools. Part broke? Fabricate a replacement in a blacksmith shop. The tracks were wood and steel. The boiler was riveted iron. The cylinders were cast bronze. Everything was visible. Everything was accessible. Everything made sense. Modern machines require computers, diagnostic software, proprietary parts, electronic control modules, CAN bus systems. Sensor fails and the whole machine shuts down. Software glitches, you're dead in the water. Dealer doesn't have the part, you wait. The Lombard didn't have sensors, it had men. Men who understood the machine, who felt steam pressure through vibration in the frame, who heard tracks slipping by the change in pitch of the engine, who knew just by sound whether a bearing was about to fail or a valve was sticking. That knowledge is gone. We've outsourced it to computers. Maybe that's progress. But it's also loss, because when the computer fails, we're helpless. When software crashes, we're stuck. We don't understand our own machines anymore. We can't fix them. We can only replace parts until something works. We lost grit. The men who ran the Lombard weren't coddled, weren't protected, were thrown into fire and told to figure it out, and they did. Learned to operate a steam engine in sub-zero temperatures with no manual, no training, no backup. Learned by doing, by failing, by watching other men and asking questions and making mistakes that sometimes cost them their lives. They learned because the alternative was failure, and failure wasn't an option. Today we have training programs, certifications, safety protocols, OSHA regulations, mandatory rest periods, climate-controlled cabs, backup alarms, emergency shutoffs. That's good, that's progress, but it's also softer. We've removed the edge, the danger. The stakes. We've made it so you can operate heavy equipment without ever really being at risk. Maybe that's made us weaker. Maybe we've lost the ability to function under pressure, to make life or death decisions in real time, to push through exhaustion and cold and fear because the job needs doing. We lost connection. The Lombard was operated by a man, a human being with hands on controls and eyes on the horizon. He felt every bump, every slip, every surge of steam. He was part of the machine. When tracks bit into ice, he felt it through the steering wheel. When boiler pressure dropped, he heard it in the engine's rhythm. When the fireman fell behind on coal, he sensed it in the loss of power. He was connected, intimately, physically. Today, machines are autonomous, self-driving, remote-controlled. The operator is a supervisor, a babysitter. He watches screens, presses buttons, monitors readouts. He's disconnected, separated from the machine by layers of electronics and software. Maybe that's safer. Maybe that's smarter. But it's also lonelier, because when you're not connected to the machine, you're not really operating it. You're just managing it, and that's not the same thing. We lost understanding of physics, real, tangible physics. The men who ran the Lombard understood force and mass and momentum in their bones, didn't learn it from textbooks, learned it by feeling 18,000 pounds of steel fighting against packed snow, learned it when tracks lost grip on ice and the whole machine started sliding sideways. Learned it when a sled hit a bump and the chain went slack, then snapped tight with enough force to jerk the hauler backwards. They understood leverage. They understood friction. They understood every action has a consequence, and in the frozen north, that consequence could kill you. Modern operators don't need to understand physics. The computer handles it. Traction control adjusts automatically. Stability system prevents rollovers. The operator just sits and steers and trusts the electronics. When electronics fail, they have no backup, no intuition, no feel for what the machine is doing. They're passengers in their own equipment. The Lombard log hauler represents a time when men built things with their hands, when progress was measured in steel and steam and sweat, when machines were dangerous, yes, but also magnificent. They were tools of raw power wielded by men who understood risk and embraced it. They were monuments to human ingenuity in the face of impossible odds, and they worked. They moved mountains. They carved empires out of wilderness. They built the modern world. Look at the cities we live in, the houses we sleep in, the paper we write on, the furniture we sit on. All of it came from timber. That timber came from forests. Those forests were logged by men on machines like the Lombard, men who woke in the dark, worked in the cold, went to bed exhausted, men who didn't complain, didn't quit, didn't ask for help. They just did the job because the job needed doing. That's the spirit we've lost, the willingness to face danger, to accept hardship, to do difficult things because they matter. We've traded that spirit for comfort, for safety, for ease. Maybe that's the right trade. Maybe we're better off. But I'm not so sure, because when I look at that rusted hulk in the museum, I don't see a relic. I see a challenge, a reminder, a monument to what men are capable of when they stop making excuses and start building solutions. Think about the economics. A Lombard cost about $8,000 in 1905. That's roughly $240,000 today. A good workhorse cost $100. You'd need at least 50 horses to match what one Lombard could do. That's 5,000 in horses, plus feed, plus veterinary care, plus replacement horses when they died, which they did constantly. The Lombard paid for itself in one season, sometimes less. And it lasted for years, decades even if you maintained it. The logging companies understood the math, understood steam was the future, that tracks were the answer. They bought Lombards by the dozen. Alvin Lombard sold over 200 haulers between 1901 and 1917, made him a millionaire in an era when $1 million meant something. But he didn't stop innovating, kept improving, kept listening to feedback from the field, kept making the machine better. That's what separated him from tinkerers and dreamers. Didn't just invent something and walk away. He perfected it, supported it, stood behind it. When a hauler broke down in the middle of nowhere, Lombard sent parts, sent mechanics, sometimes went himself. He understood his reputation was built on reliability, on results. And he delivered. The Lombard is more than a machine. It's a bridge between the age of muscle and the age of engines, between the frontier and civilization, between the impossible and the inevitable. It's a 30-foot steam monster that walked on snow and pulled 300 tons of timber through frozen hell. And it did it without computers, without GPS, without safety rails or backup systems or insurance policies. It did it with fire and steam and iron and the unbreakable will of men who refused to quit, men who looked at a forest in winter and saw opportunity, men who looked at a problem and built a solution, men who understood that progress requires sacrifice, that civilization is built on the backs of those willing to risk everything. When you walk through a museum today and see one of these machines sitting silent behind velvet ropes, remember what it represents. Not just industrial archaeology, a testament to human determination, to the idea that impossible is just a word, that challenges exist to be overcome, that winter and wilderness and physics itself will bow to men with enough courage and enough steel. The Lombard didn't conquer nature through brute force alone. It conquered nature through intelligence, through understanding, through the marriage of engineering principles and practical necessity. Alvin Lombard looked at winter logging and saw not an obstacle but a physics equation. Snow has properties. Ice has characteristics. Weight can be distributed. Friction can be manipulated. He didn't fight the snow. He worked with it, used it, turned it into an ally instead of an enemy. That's genius. Not the kind taught in universities, but the kind forged in workshops and proven in frozen forests. The operators who ran these machines were cut from the same cloth, didn't have degrees, had experience, had instinct, had practical knowledge that comes from living on the edge between success and disaster every single day. They understood their machine not as a collection of parts, but as a living system. They knew when to push it and when to back off, when to risk everything and when to play it safe. That judgment, that feel, that connection between man and machine is what made the Lombard work. The machine was powerful, yes, but it was the man who made it effective. And that's what we've lost most of all in our modern age. Not the machines themselves. We've got better machines now, faster, stronger, more capable, but we've lost the men. Or rather, we've lost the expectation that men should be that capable, that they should understand their tools that deeply, that they should carry that much responsibility. We've distributed intelligence into the machine itself, and in doing so, we've diminished the operator. So here's to Alvin Lombard, a machinist from Waterville, Maine, who looked at an impossible problem and built a solution that changed the world. A man who never went to engineering school but understood physics better than most professors. A man who built a revolution in a workshop with hand tools and determination. Here's to the operators, the men who climbed onto that platform every morning knowing they might not come home. The men who steered 30-foot steam engines through blizzards with nothing but instinct and courage. The men who kept the machines running when every rational voice said, "Stop." Here's to the firemen, the men who shoveled coal until their hands bled and their backs broke, the men who breathed smoke and coal dust for 12-hour shifts, the men who kept the fire burning no matter what. Here's to the loggers who loaded the sleds and groomed the ice roads and kept the whole operation running, the men who cut the trees and skidded the logs and built the infrastructure that made it all possible. Here's to the horses who died trying, the animals who gave everything they had and paid with their lives. They deserve to be remembered too. And here's to the men who didn't come home, the ones who got caught in the gears, who froze in the forests, who were crushed under logs or buried in avalanches or lost in blizzards. The ones whose names went into ledgers and were forgotten, the ones who took risks because there was no other choice. They built this country with steel, with steam, with blood. And we owe them more than a rusted monument in a museum. We owe them our respect, our remembrance, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of that same iron spirit. Because the world still has impossible problems. It still needs men and women willing to face them, to build solutions, to take risks, to do hard things. The Lombard log hauler is gone. The steam has cooled. The tracks have stopped. The era of iron men and mechanical monsters has passed. But the lesson remains. Progress isn't built by the timid. It's built by the bold, by the ones who look at a frozen forest and see an opportunity, who look at 300 tons of timber and see a challenge, who look at a boiler and a pair of tracks and see a revolution. That's the legacy of the snow monster that walked on winter, and that legacy is calling. The question is, are we still brave enough to answer?